Hi there folks, Sam here, and I thought we'd do a campaign diary for the last session we just put up. The first session we just uploaded, which was the Lilac Night of our current Draw Steel campaign. So I probably do these for the first few sessions, especially since there's quite a few where either the audio was bad or we didn't even record. And we'll see if they're watched, useful, fun, and if they are, we can keep doing them even with sessions we have more fully recorded. The recording thing is something we want to do for a while in our D&D campaigns, and it just felt like a good time where I've now got the kind of setup. We're doing more videos that we can record, and it's a little bit better quality. It's never going to be like great quality, at least in the technical side. We've got different levels of audio and connections and things like that. But this should be a shortcut to the kind of story beats and fun moments if you'd rather just listen to a quick short video rather than go through a whole 3-hour stream, which I empathise with. So this first session we had the setup, which I've talked about a couple of times, but basically Capital is this massive city in Orden, the world of Draw Steel, and it's this huge metropolis, very multicultural, but the sort of central tension there is there's these guilds which are up and coming, progressive, powerful, sort of commercial entities versus these conservative, entrenched great houses, and they are in conflict. Up until now, the great houses have been the ones with all the power, even if they can't quite match the wealth of the guilds. But right around the start of this campaign, so a year previous to the campaign starting, one of the dukes of the great houses was assassinated, and his house collects all the taxes, and his wife basically said, until you return my husband from the dead, no one's getting their taxes. So a year on, everyone's kind of struggling, and on the events of the Lilac Night, which is our players played through a small part of that all starts to change, and this steady state begins to crumble, and the tension starts to rise to boiling point or breaking point. So we'll focus in on our heroes now. So we had a suite of 5 heroes. We have Opaline, who is for this session is a devil elementalist, a fire elementalist. We have Francesca Foscari, who is a void elementalist. She's human. We have Rolf Thorson, who's a human. His family are from Vanagar, the sort of Viking nation, and they've come to Capital. And he's a tactician. He's a vanguard tactician. We have Sketch, who's a high elf who was raised in the city by goblins, and she's just been doing her own thing, doing a sort of apprenticeship, and has suddenly got dragged back into this sort of criminal world. So she's a caustic alchemy shadow, which is a sort of not quite an artificer, but kind of leaning that way. And last but not least, we have Azrael Stormseer, our conduit of fate and storm, who's a time raider, which for those who don't know is a 4-armed, one-eyed alien, basically. So the pitch we gave to the heroes was, so I've written up this adventure, we'll probably stick it up somewhere at some point, and that has a very specific lead in, but because this was our home game, we went complicated. So I gave everyone a different hook. So Sketch had been hired she'd been drawn back into her sort of family, her gang she grew up with, called the Pitch, and they'd taken on a job to go to a warehouse in Villa Caramia, which is or what will become known as the Dead City in Capital, ruled by House Valletta. And her and the Pitch had a mission. They were to break into this warehouse and steal an object known as the device. Straightforward, right? Meanwhile, Rolf, whose character knew Sketch from their childhood, unbeknownst to either of them, they're both being sent here, but he's been sent there by his guild, his thieves guild, the Keys, to protect this device, and there's a ritual being conducted, so to make sure everything goes smoothly. Opaline has been contacted by a long-time mentor figure, Reginald Orfeo, who is a lawyer, and she's a lawyer, But her stock and trade is working with her family business, which is very criminal, and she's the sort of defense attorney. And he says, we need someone with your sort of capabilities, with your, willingness to step in and outside the law, to go here and conduct a ritual. You'll meet some people, they'll tell you what to do. It'll be grand. And so she also comes to this warehouse and she meets Rolf and the rest of the keys, and she's in the room with this device and a document known as the Ramsey Treatise, which is basically a how-to on how to work the device and activate it. The treatise itself was stolen from the university, one of the colleges university, which is where Francesca Foscari has grown up in isolation, or in a very limited group. She doesn't really step foot outside the college, but when one of the books that she's come to know off by heart, she knows every book in her library, is stolen, she then sets out into the world to pursue it and track it down. And that's what sends her on a collision course to this warehouse. Azrael, as happens in many campaigns, was a last-minute addition, but very fittingly, being a conduit of a fate god, is used to being picked up and plopped down in the middle of things. So he arrives in a place not knowing what's going on, and in this case he was on a boat in the Astral Sea, and suddenly he was on a boat in the Capital Sea, and this little dinghy's heading for shore, starting to sink, and he's playing the Pirates of the Caribbean tune in the back of his head before he steps onto the docks. So that was our setup, and we took a bit of time with each of the characters. So Sketch and the other members of the pitch kind of were heading in, and then this was all the players' first times playing, so we're just learning rules and trying out different things. So they've got the warehouse, and Sketch decided she was going to scale the side of the building, try and get a look in the windows, and she asked the pitch to make a distraction. They rolled abominably and ended up making a bit of a ruckus and causing a sort of bad smell, and as a consequence were basically removed from the adventure. Just knocking this arm about everywhere. So she's sneaking up around the roof, she's trying to look in the windows, and she realises that there's a lot of people inside. This job's going to be harder than they think. She recognises a rival gang, even though from a different part of the city, and starts to formulate a plan of how she can get inside. Meanwhile, Opaline has begun conducting this ritual. She's making some rolls to try and activate this device. And Rolf hears the commotion outside. He's thinking, this is starting to get a bit weird. There's a lot more activity here than we thought there would be. And he heads to the door. At the same time, Francesca has been following the trail of this book using her magic, and also a bit of kind of classic detective work, just asking people and using all her skills and limited street skills to try and find this warehouse. She's heading for the door. She sees a guard outside, and not knowing much else, as Rolf opens the door, she's heading in, and someone in her way tries to stop her, so she teleports past them. At this point, Rolf, not knowing, the players know these are all PCs, but Rolf doesn't know Francesca's not someone who's trying to break in, so he grabs her, and that becomes a whole conversation. And she brilliantly sort of says, well, I'm here for the book, and Rolf sort of lets slip that they were looking for a mage, and she's like, well, I'm the mage. And then Rolf's confused because they've already got the mage, and that means calling out the boss. And while this is all happening, Sketch managed to slip inside. She does note that this girl's getting into a bit of trouble, but she's got a job to do, so she's sneaking in and going through the warehouse, trying to find where the device is hidden. Meanwhile, back at the door, this conflict and this confusion about who is the real mage has Rolf doubting Opaline is the right person, and she manages to activate the device, which immediately begins having an effect on the magic users. So particularly Opaline and Francesca, they start to notice their magic's just not quite as powerful. Whatever this item does, it sort of drains magical power. So with the boss being called Havoc, he literally being called Havoc, but being called over, he sort of puts Francesca to the question and then drags her into Opaline, and he basically demands that they explain who they are and who the real mage is. Again, not knowing that these are not having the meta knowledge that is player characters. Opaline demonstrates her magic, and she does a little arcane trick. And when Francesca tries to do the same, this draining magic has enough of an effect that she fails to do it, potentially outing her as the imposter, which she is, kind of. At the same time, Sketch gets spotted, so Rolf runs off in that direction, is chasing this intruder, and then they come face to face, realise they have this whole history, and he's like, you can't mess around with these people, they're really dangerous. She's like, yeah, it'll be fine. So as she's getting brought through, she decides to pretend that Francesca is her missing sister, her sister who keeps wandering off. And they play at this whole acting debacle. It's a lot of fun. And Havoc is just at the edge of his nerves. And that's when Azrael shows up at the front door and surprises a frazzled guard. The guard turns around, sees the four-armed, one-eyed alien, and screams. And that's when Havoc says, enough. Kill them. And then we drew steel. I did say the characters or the players in that moment, I was like, whatever's happening, this is the night you guys become heroes. Or now that you're player characters, we're playing a game, you are heroes, for good or for bad. So you need to decide now where you're thrown in. And it was obvious that Francesca and Sketch were thrown in together. And Rolf said that basically there was no way Rolf would pass up or he wouldn't protect Sketch. So he throws himself in front of Havoc's sword and starts dueling him. Meanwhile, Opaline, she's a lawyer. I mean, she's a very dodgy lawyer, but she has got a bit of sense of justice, and she's not wanting to see these people murdered purely for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Up till now, this has been a very low-level crime, some kind of ritual, but nothing massive and dangerous. So she also throws in with the party. Phew. At the same time, Azrael is suddenly being attacked outside, so he's getting bolts shooting at him. There's archers on the upper floor of the warehouse start attacking the only person they can see, which is him. So he's having to kind of throw it down. And then this brawl just breaks out, and, you know, it's a wooden warehouse, people are getting thrown through walls, there's explosions of fire and void magic. Rolf's, grabbing people, throwing them. Havoc's doing the same. And the archers upstairs again, just peppering everyone they can with arrows. This was pretty much the end of session 1. And we had a second session which was pretty much just all combat. We tend to have shorter sessions, believe it or not. And that's why you see like sort of Thea videos, or 2.5 ones we've cut down a bit. But in our second session, we were down a player, so we invited one of our friends to join in, which is why about halfway through this fight, a bear wanders into the warehouse, and everyone's like, oh, that's a bear. And our logic here was the character our friend was playing had picked up a Hakan Stormwhite Fury, and we sort of talked back and forth a few ideas, and he basically decided that his character was in the bar nearby and had just saw a brawl and decided to investigate. Unfortunately, he's too drunk to change back from being a bear. So, from everyone else's perspective, in the middle of the city, a bear has walked in and just starts throwing people around. Equally identified who the bad guys are, and it all kind of works in a teamwork kind of way. And eventually they dispatch the keys, or any remaining keys that don't run. At that point, everyone's not all friends again. Francesca's like, that's my treatise, and Opaline's like, well, it's mine now. This device is running, and they're torn over whether to try and deactivate it or not. They eventually do, but at that point, it's too late. There's another rap at the door, and then it's kicked in, and a bunch of armoured knights walk in. Black armour, gold filigree. These are the Arbitros Fiat, the Knights of House Valletta. Think somewhere between the HMRC, or the IRS, and the FBI. And they come in, and they've been sent here because this device is disrupting another ritual, or has the potential to disrupt that ritual that's being conducted by Lady Valletta, which becomes important later. So they don't ask questions, they charge in, and this is suddenly really powerful characters, and everyone's quite hard pressed to fight back. And we're sort of moving into the third session now of actual play. So these knights are kind of cutting down characters. A lot of people are going to winded, some are going to dying, and eventually they manage to overcome them and defeat the knights. The device is still intact, it's now deactivated, so they take it with them. And as they step out, they see the thick mist outside has turned a sort of lilac shade. It was at this point I described the sound of screams in the distance, and our Void Elementalist, who can see magic, sees that this mist is unnatural. There's some flash of violet light, and though they're unsure what's happening, this mist is dangerous, it's deadly, and it's starting to kill people. At this point we moved into a montage test, and I told the players that you don't know much about this, but you do know that you're surrounded by civilians. Some are asleep in their beds, some are out in the street. Your job is to get as many of them out as you can, but make it out yourselves as well. So then I presented a few different challenges. I said, well, you don't know what this is, so you could look into it. You could try and wake people up. You could try and find, quick, safe routes out. And there were a couple others as well. And that's what they did. So we started doing the montage test. We got a few early successes. Francesca was able to give everyone her void sight, which let them see a bit better in this magic mist. Rolf had a monologue champion as a title, which allowed him to draw attention by sort of starting to do a speech, starting to shout and drag people out their beds. With people creating masks using the tailoring skill, so to try and slow the spread of this. And as we finished the first round of the montage test, I explained sort of developing, well, now you know this is dangerous necromantic magic. I need you guys to, one, get out of here, and B, try and find ways to reduce the effect of that magic on yourselves. And again, they're rolling. We got really close. It became apparent they couldn't get a partial success, so it was going to be all or nothing. Either they're going to fail here, or they're going to succeed the montage and evacuate the area. This is where another layer came into play. So I'd had people make their characters in isolation rather than as a party. Always a gamble. And I did this because I wanted people to pick authentically what they wanted to play rather than not pick things because someone else was playing it. So we end up with 2 Elementalists, but we end up with 3 Revenants, which was actually what drew me to running something on the Lilac Knight in the first place. So what I do is, as I message the 3 players who are Revenants and say, you guys don't make it out of this, so describe to me what you do on your turns without trying to make a break for it. So Francesca, I believe she manages to teleport out and take some civilians with her, gets across the canal to where the mist isn't touching. Azrael throws himself into the water, he's escaping. Opaline turns because she hears screams further back in the mist, and she manages to grab these people and push them towards the bridge where Francesca's actually reactivated the device and it's holding the mist at bay. And she manages to get these people in, but she collapses just before she can escape. Rolf and Sketch, they're shoving civilians into the water, onto boats, across the bridge, and then they sort of collapse in a doorway. And Opaline, Sketch and Rolf are dead. But they did achieve a total success on the montage, so they all got awarded the local hero title, which lets them pick from a few different things, and they all picked Renown to sort of represent this idea that they're now famous in this area because they've saved lives. And then I described as all the people, which were not many, left on the other side of the canal, the deadly side, along with the player characters who died, all start to rise and sit up and have become Revenants. So that was an action-packed couple of sessions, and it ties into the overall story of Capital as we know it, which was on this night known as the Lilac Night, Lady Valletta tried to conduct a ritual to bring back her dead husband. For some reason that failed, and no one is sure why. Well, no one is telling if they do know. But the players are then left to wrestle with, what if they, by not doing stuff in time or by stopping the device, did their actions have something to do with this? It was important enough for the ladies' knights to come and intervene. So they're left sort of grappling with this and with a bunch of questions. They're wondering who ultimately hired the pitch, who stole the treatise, who hired the keys to defend the device. These are all threads that they're going to explore throughout the next couple of sessions. But ultimately what happens is this is about 3,000 people in Capital are killed in the Lilac Night, and they all come back as revenants. As a result, the rest of the city quarantines Villa Caramia, the dead city, and says, until we know what's going on, until we know if this is contagious or whatever, zombie outbreak, you guys can't leave. And that's what kind of set up the next phase of our campaign. So in Drosteel, there's a mechanic called respites, and while you're on a respite, you can take an activity. So you can learn a different kit, you can go fishing, you can undertake research or crafting. And I trying to the calendar for my campaign, I'm trying to work out times. It says, right, you guys are, I mean, if you're revenants, you're stuck here, so you can probably find some lodging. For Asriel and Francesca, you guys can go home if you want. Well, Asriel's an alien, so can't go home. But Francesca can go home, or you could stay with your kind of newfound companions who've experienced this traumatic event with you. But the quarantine on a meta level is going to last 3 months, which is 90 days, which turns out to be 90 respites. And that's where we're gonna the space we're gonna play in for now. So we did that, and the characters all had different approaches to their death. The ones who died, Sketch becomes much more of a vengeful creature. She's angry, she's determined to find a cure for this. And for her, going from a high elf who has this glamour, like people are just naturally drawn to her, to having this dead eyes and grey skin, is a challenge. Opaline again thinks this is something primarily bad that's happened to her. Sure, she's tougher now and she seems like she can't die, but it's not ideal. And then Rolf is thinking, this is Valhalla. I died. I'm now alive again, in a way. And the woman I love is here. I can still go for a drink. I can fight. This is basically heaven. And that's been a fun dynamic to play with as well. As for their crafting and research, they've done a few different things with it. Opaline has reached out to the community. She's spent all her time communicating, holding events, and trying to almost become like a local politician in her area. But she's left with this fact that her family back home, who were used to relying on her, now don't know where she is, and she has to say if she's going to get in contact with them or not. Rolf had a few personal ambitions, one of which was to recover his family sword, because he's broken with the keys now, but they're still in this area, they're still in Villa Caramia, and he has to decide, does he want to go back and claim that sword if he can, and along with it find out why the keys were there. Francesca is invested in sort of helping her new friends, so Asriel she's really keen to learn from, because all her knowledge before now has been theoretical, and now she has this practical space. Again, she should maybe return home, her family will definitely expect her to, but for now she's staying put. She's learning from Asriel, she's assisting Sketch with her research into a cure for this state. Sketch, again, she's gone into her crafting, she's leaning on her hobbies in life. She's making a bunch of cool items. She's researching a cure. And Asriel himself, he's kind of just getting a lie of the land. He's used to having a lot of information. He's a bit of foresight. He starts reaching out to sort of criminal contacts, or making criminal contacts, and just learning a lot about the local area and local space. Starting to become a sort of spider at the centre of his web of contacts. And that sort of continued on, and we've had a few breaks in that. So with research, events crop up, And the first couple of times they were sort of minor, we didn't really delve too far into them, but they're supposed to be a kind of narrative thing, but also a break to stop your progress, because we noticed people were kind of flying through their projects really quickly. And the first one that we rolled with and did something with was when they were researching a cure, they got a event that said a patron comes and offers to finish your research for you, but requires a favour in return. And that led us to a session where the players were invited to House Valletta, to the Castle Valletta, to meet the lady. And she offered to finish the research, and they confirmed there is a way to reverse the sort of Revenant curse. But the price is sort of, you have to attend this dinner. And when they arrive, it's just Lady Valletta and them. And it becomes this game of sort of cat and mouse, where they don't want to admit they were there and they might have been involved in disrupting her ritual, but she suspects they were and wants to essentially prod them towards looking into it. She wants to know not even why it failed, but who was invested in trying to make it fail. So who wanted that device there, who wanted the players there to try and disrupt things. And she, in the end, they have a negotiation. I think I've talked about this in another video, where the key of negotiation is the players need to instigate it, and this is where I made an error, and I sort of pushed it from the NPC end, which didn't really work. But we came out of it with the ladies basically encouraging them to continue to investigate. She makes them Knights of the City, or Knights of House Valletta, which in capital is basically just a license to carry weapons, which was useful for a few of the characters. And she also gives them a villa in Capello Park. So they're with the people they've saved, but she also has a lot of people who can keep an eye on them. They won't go too far if they're living near her. As they're leaving, they discover a riot outside. And in that riot, it's not so much a riot, it's more of a crowd, a mob, kind of, who are a bit angry. And as they sort of look a bit closer, they see a few different figures trying to stir things up, trying to instigate a riot. And that was when Rolf and Opaline step in, and they try to calm the crowd, which they do successfully, but that only makes these instigators lash out, and they find themselves in this combat. So there's civilians running, and some of the angrier ones are actually fighting alongside these instigators, and they notice all the instigators have sort of the same sort of dead flesh, but they have a lot of like stitches, and rather than being undead, they seem to be sort of patchwork people. The heroes sort of dispatch them in the end. They break up the riot just in time to run into a reporter who doesn't necessarily identify themselves straight away. They just start asking questions. And by the time the players realise that the journalist is gathering details for a story, it's too late, and they sort of book it out of there. That was a good event, because not only was it randomly rolled and then developed by myself, it had all these sprouting off points for the players during their downtime. So people wanted to speak to the journalist or speak to the Broadsheets Guild and try and quash the story. Rolf and Sketch wanted to track down the instigators, so obviously they'd kill these ones, but they had a lot of like explosives and chemicals on them, and they wanted to follow that trail back to its own thread. Rolf still wanted to go and reclaim his sword from the keys. And Opaline still wanted to... She's seen there's a tension here, there's sort of energy here, there's potential for violence, and she's like, can I use that in my sort of... I don't know what her plan is, but she's trying to build some sort of political power. And yeah, so that gave a lot of sort of juice for the next wave of respite activities. So we did a session where we did go to the Handsome Devil, which is a tavern, which is also the hideout for the keys. And the characters, they got with a plan to get in, and once they got in, found themselves a little bit over their heads. We only had, I think it was Francesca, Rolf, and Sketch. And essentially they found themselves imprisoned in the sort of cells, but pretty much all the characters have ways of getting out of that really easily. And they end up in a negotiation with the new leaders of the Keys, which again, they roll really well. They're quite successful in their negotiation, and they not only convince them to give up Rolf's sword, but they learn that the leader of the guild, Sal, she was a new leader, which Rolf knew already. She'd just recently taken over, and she'd been using the Keys to spy on House Valletta. And they also discovered that the Fulcrum, which is one of the major guilds, had been the ones to hire the Keys to protect the device. That became important in a wider lens, because one of the things that happened after the Lilac Night is that the prince realised that there was no chance anytime soon he was going to get the funds injected that he needed to keep the city running. So he allowed the Fulcrum and 2 other guilds to buy their way onto the council using the Fulcrum's money. So now the city has the prince at the centre as a sort of tiebreaker, but the power that was reserved for the great houses is now being shared with the guilds, which is creating a lot of tension. So it makes sense that the Fulcrum would want the ladies' ritual to fail, because it then gave them this opportunity to buy their way onto the council. So that made a lot of sense for them, and that's a thread they're going to follow once they can leave the district after the quarantine is lifted. Opaline went off and had her own adventure. She snuck out of the quarantine and found the lawyer who'd hired her and sent her in, and discovered that he works for another one of the great houses. He works for House Alvaro, who are probably the most powerful house. Duke Alvaro is the most powerful after the prince. And that was pretty much mostly what she determined. She also determined that Alvaro had given instructions so that someone be sent to do this ritual, and it was this man she considered her mentor, who is now also a revenant because he ended up in Lilac Night as well. It's he that chose her to go, because her family is a danger to Alvaro, and he cynically saw the opportunity to get rid of 2 birds with 1 stone. But you've then got this strange situation where they now have a thread where Alvaro wanted the ritual stopped, so he's somehow in league with the Fulcrum, maybe. For whatever reason, both their goals were aligned in this instance, and that's another thread that the players are unsure how to proceed with. Although Rolf has a few ideas for potentially following, maybe infiltrating the House Alvaro's organisation and finding out a bit more. The last thing that the players have done within this respite, I mean, they've still crafted a whole bunch of things and researched a lot, is Sketch and Rolf did a couple of research projects. First of all, going around all the alchemists and trying to find out who sold these explosives that the rioters were using. And they then managed to follow, when they found a particular alchemist, they got their ledger and have been going door to door to try and figure out who it was that was buying this. In the last session we played, they discovered that this all led back to a villa called the Madam House, which is also in Villa Caramia. They convinced most of the party to go along with them and have a look, while Opaline stayed back, continuing her sort of more sort of civic duties. And a couple of things happen. While they were away at the Madam House, there was an assassination attempt on Opaline's life. Now, whether that's to do with what she was doing, her sort of public speaking, her political goals, or whether that's related to something more in the story, the players don't know. And while the rest of these guys went to the Madam House, they spent a lot of time trying to sneak in, and when they did, they find it's full of more of these patchwork people who instantly attack, and it was a long, sort of protracted, bloody battle. Both Opaline in their assassination and Rolf during this fight were reduced to enough to kill most characters, but as they're revenants, they merely become inert. So it was a kind of close thing. When they eventually overcome these creatures, who they learn are war dogs, and they learn a bit more about them in the context of the wider world, they discover that all the documents in the house have been destroyed, And when they try to take War Dog prisoners, the War Dogs have these loyalty collars that started detonating, meaning they basically were robbed of all information or further context for what was going on. But what they do know is that Ajax, one of the great villains of this world, this conqueror who's taken over several countries, the War Dogs are created for him, and they are fanatically loyal to him. So whatever was going on and whatever contact they've had in the city, the War Dogs were doing something on Ajax's bidding. And that's where we're up to. Going forward, the players have indicated they want to look into the assassination or attempted assassination of Opaline, and also to start getting towards the end of this quarantine and go out into the world and go to the stays and maybe follow the thread of, well, if we know who hired the Keys, who hired the pitch? Could we track down the leader of the Keys who's gone missing now? Can we find out what Alvaro's hand in this is? And that's a good place for us to be in. We've got a lot of different threads to follow, and the players are keeping notes and they're sort of unravelling this conspiracy bit by bit. This turned into an overview of everything that's happened so far, so there won't be multiple different campaign diaries for now. I think this is a meaty offering. But if you're interested in our story, like I said, you'll be able to watch those sessions. The first one's up just now. And if you like this world, you can check out Draw Steel, you can check out any of MCDM's products. And if you keep following, you'll hear more of these stories. Cheers.